So the existence, nature, and function, we'll go over this. But then also what we're looking at within this, well, let's just start here. So Cornelius Van Til, as way of review, the three-step approach that we are taking when we're discussing the truths of the Christian faith. So if we remember for the past couple weeks, what is step number one?
Identify intelligibility.
Identify what?
Preconditions.
Preconditions. What are preconditions?
What's necessary for it to exist.
All right. So what is needed, and here's going to be our three areas. You can go to any one of these. What is needed in order for something to exist? What is needed in order for something to have the nature that it has? Or what is needed in order for something to function as it does? So existence, we're going to look at this when we go into first principles. Non-being cannot produce being. So in other words, something can't come from nothing. That answer here, we're not going to say that one anymore, because what this ends up becoming is a crutch. We have it in our mind and we always go back to this one. We want to be able to develop these two as well. So let's try not to go here anymore. We know that's true. But what we're talking about now is in these areas. Because what we're doing is we're taking a concrete principle as the gospel, and we're breaking it down into every single category that flows from the gospel. Being, morality, existence, purpose, meaning, nature. All of this comes from the gospel. All of this is the gospel. Everything ties back to God the Creator. Everything's the gospel. So when we're preaching these things, we are bringing the gospel. Every one of these ties back to the gospel. But what we're doing is like when we're fishing and we throw that line out with the bait on it, how do we grab the fish? You just can't go into the water and straight grab the fish. You got to throw the line out and bring it in. These are like that. These are connecting principles that we start with to bring people back here. Existence is one of them. This argument here, non-being can't produce being. Nature. What needs to exist in order for blank to be as it is? A human being. What needs to exist in order for a human being to be as they are? Function. What needs to exist in order for the laws of nature to govern matter and energy as it does? This is the first step. You can use it for any one of these. You can use it for any one of these. All of this is the gospel. Simply just stating a Bible verse, God can use that. But in a culture today where we don't have the same common denominator anymore, somebody starts with Z. Another person starts with X. We have to convert Z to X. How do we convert Z to X? We use this method to get them back into the biblical mindset. Once we got them on the biblical mindset, we can evangelize with biblical terms. But if you're talking to an atheist and you're using theological terms, you're going to be shooting past each other. So what we need to do is take somebody off of their starting point and bring them back to the Christian starting point. And this is what this argument helps to do. So first step, what is necessary in order for, let's take a look at the example on here. The cake on the table to exist. This will get our thinking so we can move from things that we're familiar with to the abstract. So the cake on the table to exist, obviously you need the ingredients, you need the intelligence, you need the recipe, you need the oven, you need the laws of nature, you need all of those things. All right? Our starting point is Yahweh, the necessary being of Yahweh. What is the starting point for the atheist?
No God.
Right? But they start with,
Science.
no, matter.
Oh.
Everything is reducible to matter. Okay. So now, what is necessary in order for the universe to exist? So when we're talking to an atheist, let's just talk about the second example on here now, morality. What is necessary in order for morality to exist? What needs to be in order for morality to exist?
You need to know right from wrong.
Right. So moral principles. What else? You got to be able to think, right? In order to, you got to have a will, emotion. So in order to have moral principles, you have to have what? A moral lawgiver. Otherwise, there'd be no moral principles. But this moral lawgiver can't be just a human being, because then it's arbitrary and there really isn't any morality. It's just a consensus. So what you need, and for moral principles are absolute. We all agree the intentional killing of an innocent human being is immoral. It's an absolute principle. Then you need what? An absolute lawgiver. This is what's necessary in order for morality to exist. Now, that's step one. What's step two?
Conduct critique.
So what is that? Conduct or critique?
We're talking about Vento, right? Second step.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep, right here, yep. So we have to explain what's necessary. Now we're doing the critique. So what Francis Schaeffer refers this to as, what you're going to do is you're going to take the roof off. And what he means by that, taking the roof off, is taking the roof off so somebody can look down at their own worldview and see all of the flaws that are in it. So for example, if everything consists of matter, how do you go from matter to thought? If everything starts with matter, how do you go from matter to emotion or to moral principles? These things are immaterial. Matter is material. If everything is matter, how do you go from matter to this?
Or they just think it's chemicals, or we have to demonstrate it's spirit or soul.
So what they try to do is make everything matter, yeah. So you got to go from matter to immaterial. How do you derive this? Because this requires thought. This requires intentionality. This requires purpose. It requires all of those things. How do you go from matter to this if your starting point is matter? You can't. So now what you're doing is you're taking the roof off of what they believe. You're demonstrating to them that their worldview is insufficient to answer these questions. So we can do this for morality. Let's go to the next one. The human mind, the ability to think, consciousness, thought, volition. Again, what is necessary in order for human thought to exist? What is necessary for the human brain to exist? What is necessary for one person to go from one thought to another via logical deduction? What is necessary for all of that? And you're doing the same type of thing. And now, if you're going to go back over here, now you must ask that person, how does that evolve from matter? You believe in science. Okay, demonstrate to me in a scientific laboratory how this evolved to that. Now what you're doing, because for the past 150 years, the burden of proof has been on the Christian for absolutely every single skeptical question you could possibly think of regarding the Bible. Here what we're doing is we're reversing the tide and pushing it back the other way. Explain to me how matter can produce this. And then step 3 is what?
Demonstrate deity or Yahweh. I'm trying to use alliteration.
What's step 3?
Ability to think.
What's that?
Ability to think.
Well, that would hopefully be for every one of these steps.
Step 3 is showing that your way explains it.
The necessity of God.
So step 3, you can break it down into 3 steps. If I spell this wrong, intelligible, abductive logic, and the impossibility of the contrary. So we can do this in 3 steps. The first thing you want to do is to demonstrate the intelligibility of the Christian faith. Because today people think you open up a Bible, you're opening up a medieval superstitious book full of errors, full of dragons, full of fairy tales that has no relevance to today. That's your average person on the street's mindset of the Bible. If you talk to the average person on the street, they're going to think it's just a bunch of religious hocus pocus stuff that has absolutely no relevance in this world today. So what you're doing is you're countering that claim of Christianity being foolish by demonstrating that the only intelligible answer is the Christian faith. Or at least, Christianity is intelligible. And what you're doing by taking the roof off is you're showing that the atheistic worldview is not intelligible. Even though when you turn on the TV or when you go on the internet, all the scientists are saying it is. You're demonstrating that it's not. So this is completely countercultural to what we've been experiencing the past 100 years. We're reversing this thinking by demonstrating each one of these points that Christianity is at least intelligible because it connects back to the necessary being of Yahweh. Without the necessary being of Yahweh, none of this would exist. So we'll get into more of those arguments later on. Second, what we're doing is abductive logic. Do you remember what that is? So take all of these as people's worldview, philosophy, or religion. What you're going to do is take a look at all of them and ask somebody what is the best explanation for the world as the way it is today. And again, if it's an atheist, what is it? Big Bang and evolution. So if the Big Bang brought out an explosion, and over billions of years of evolution from an explosion, that's how we get morality. And then they're going to say, well, that's just way too simplistic of an answer. Okay, well, break it down for me. Demonstrate to me scientifically how an explosion and then evolution created this. So what we're doing is we're taking the roof off by demonstrating that what they believe really has no foundation whatsoever. They've just been told over and over and over and over again it's true. Just because you're told something's true over and over and over again doesn't necessarily make it true. And then the third one is the impossibility of the contrary. What you're showing is that if you have an either or, so B being everything comes from matter, and you're showing that if that's impossible, A must be true. It's called the law of either or. It's one of the laws of logic. So the impossibility of the contrary is showing that if the material, everything can't be just matter. Or everything can't be just thought. So whatever worldview you're arguing against, if it's not that, it has to be the other one. So the impossibility of the contrary is, if God doesn't exist, nothing would exist, and nothing would be true. Therefore, God must exist. So you seeing how that works? Any questions on this? Because this is kind of our foundation before we move on. Is that pretty clear?
Yeah, so the third step is basically demonstrating that God is real, but you saying you do that kind of by the either or, saying you can't have a universe without God. So
right.
God must
So first we're showing that Christianity is intelligible. Second, we're by abductive logic, we're showing that it's the only rational one that makes sense. The only one that can account for all the questions of life. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? All of those questions. And then the third one is the impossibility of the contrary, showing how we can't evolve from matter. So so there's two options as to how we got here. God created us, or we created ourselves. Either random naturalistic chance or intentional creational design. Those are your two. When you demonstrate that we did not evolve by natural processes because it's impossible, the only other option is we were created. So the impossibility of the contrary, we didn't create ourselves. We just didn't happen to evolve. Therefore, we had to have been created. Make sense?
Hey, Ben, I was just wondering, is it possible for you to use another example besides atheism?
Okay, so let's use,
apply that to
the only reason why I'm using it is because it's the most we're most familiar with. I could use idealism, but then we're going to have to go into what that all is.
Okay, I see.
Everything is just thought.
Yeah,
This is one we're familiar with.
right.
So what would be another one, do you think, that we could use?
Well, go ahead.
That there are many gods.
or the New Age.
Well, that would be idealism. The New Age is idealism.
Okay.
Everything is thought. Everything is mind.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, so then we'd have to break down that worldview. And then if we're going into comparative religions, so we're starting with God, but then we got to define God, and then we got to go into the history. So I think because we're covering scientism in this class, scientism is rooted in materialism. So any type of ism, you got to find its starting point. Remember, we have starting point, method, and conclusion. We have to start at the starting point, which is based upon presuppositions. What we're doing is we're challenging those presuppositions with this method. So if we can start at the starting point and demonstrate that you can't start from there, it doesn't work, the method and the conclusion, same thing in math. If you get the first line wrong on the equation, the rest of your equation is going to be off. So we're just going all the way back to somebody's pre-commitments. There's really not that many pre-commitments. Even if you say, okay, we've been seeded here by aliens, well, that doesn't really answer the problem, because then where did the aliens come from? So we have to be pushing back to a necessary being anyways. So all of these kind of flow together after a while, and we'll kind of see that. So what did we cover so far? We covered philosophy of mind. What is necessary in order for human thought to function as it does? And we needed 3. Remember last week? We needed reason, we needed a will, and we needed consciousness. So when we're listening to somebody who's a determinist, who says our brain is nothing more than chemical neurological reactions, and we don't have a soul. So anybody who would say we don't have a soul and we are determined in our brain, where's their starting point? Materialism, atheism. So all of these isms are an offshoot of materialism. So if you take out materialism, you have all the isms in that chunk or in that worldview slot. So now, if we're talking to an atheist who doesn't believe we have a soul and that our mind is nothing more than chemical reactions in our brain, we have to ask ourselves, what is necessary in order for thought to exist as it does? Reason, will, and consciousness.
A soul and a computer.
Right.
And a human made in God's image.
And that's why it's important we understand all of these distinctions, because they are blurring the lines. And what they're doing is they're altering what a human being is, somebody who's created in the image of God.
Yes.
So this is a gospel issue.
Yes.
See how this all connects.
And
But, go ahead.
isn't it also true that it's about conscience as well as consciousness, right?
Yes, of
Conscience
course.
being.
Well, a conscience is a moral, like your moral compass, right?
Right.
Right. Consciousness, right here, in the sense, is your ability to think, reason, all of those kinds of. So these all fit together. Now, if something is just a chemical reaction, it's just going to do this, or it's just going to do that. It's causal principles, okay? So chemical reactions just go boom, 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 boom. But what the human mind is able to doing, you remember the syllogism we did last week? So the difference between, and I'll download Character AI and I'll debate AI. I'll debate the atheist AI app. And what ends up happening is I catch it in contradictions, and I catch it in saying falsehoods, and I catch it avoiding the question. So human reason and human logic, you still catch it. And last week it lied. You lied last night when I was doing it. I was debating it, and it lied to me. And I said, no, that's not right. This is right. Yes, you are correct. I'm sorry. I was mistaken. So if I went to call it out, AI lied. So AI is limited too. So what's the difference between a computer program and a human being? A human mind can do that. It can think, wait a minute, A and B don't equal C here. AI just lied to me, where AI is just spitting out an answer.
Yeah.
So there's still flaws in it. I'm sure they'll work them out too. I don't know. But so what we can do, Socrates,
Oh, AI gets smarter.
it can, but even if it's wrong, you can still call it out.
Yeah.
What's right is right.
Yeah.
But we need reason. So we need to be able to do this. Socrates is a man. All men are mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Causal reactions can only go one-dimensional. It goes like this. So if it's just chemicals, you're only going to do what your chemical brain reactions are doing. Here what we're doing is we're taking our thought and we're logically putting it into a syllogism and coming to a conclusion. Chemicals can't do that. You need a will. You need laws of logic. You need consciousness. Where does that come from? And if we're an atheist who believes all things come from matter, how do those three things come from matter? And then you ask them, okay, you believe in science. Show me the experiments where this is taking place in a laboratory. Or show me where we have historical evidence where matter produced consciousness. And it gets them thinking in a way they never thought before. And now we have another step closer to bringing it back to the gospel, because we bring it back to Yahweh, the necessary being. And do we remember the 5 things that are necessary for God in order to be necessary being?
Eternity, infinity, personality.
Eternal, infinite. Somebody's cheating over there on the couch. Infinite, eternal, unchangeable, immaterial, and personal.
So could I argue that Socrates, yes, he is a man, but you say all men are mortal. That's where I would say, wait a minute, he has an eternal soul.
Yeah, with the human body. So we're talking about the man.
Only the body.
We're talking, so a human being is composite of what? Both body and soul. It's a composite, right? So if we have a human body, it eventually dies.
Yes.
Now the soul is eternal, but the body dies. So therefore all men are mortally die.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Separation of body and soul.
Right. Now we're going to look in the last, how long do we got? 10 minutes? Oh boy, okay. Information. See, all of these, so we have philosophy of mind, we have morality, we have information. All of these are evangelistic tools, because we take these and we ask those 3 questions. What is necessary in order for information to exist? How does information exist how does information come from matter? And then demonstrate how Christianity is intelligible, because information comes from the intellect, the mind of God. All other worldviews that don't hold to Yahweh as necessary being don't line up through abductive logic. And through the impossibility of the contrary, information could not have come about by itself. Therefore, it had to be from an infinite source. Every one of these, if you use this argument, is an evangelistic argument. We're using nature and we're pointing it back to God. So information. What is often overlooked when conducting scientific experiments is the nature of information. Remember, we had the 3 here on the board. I erased them already. We're looking at 3 different aspects. We're looking at existence, nature, and function. So this argument can be used for 3 different things. For the existence of something, for the nature of something, for instance, human nature. Why does human nature compose of an intellect, emotion, and a will? And for function. Why does the universe or the earth function as it does? All of these are evangelistic points. All of these we can use this argument for. Now what we're seeing here is what is often looked when conducting scientific experiments is what? The nature of information. So what is the nature of information? First of all, is it material or immaterial? It's immaterial. Here we have a written down transcript of the immaterial in our minds. How is information conveyed? Speech? Right. Where does that speech come from? The mind. Information is transmitted from one mind to another. We might write it down. Tammy might still store it on one of those giant floppy disks on her computer. But we have it from one mind to another, right? One mind to another. Okay, so then how do we account for the nature of information? What must it be? What must its ultimate starting point be? Matter? Or an infinite mind? If it's a finite mind, then we're relying on the mind before it, and before it, and before it. So we need an infinite starting point for anything to exist. Does that make sense? If it's just finite minds, and human beings have just evolved this over the centuries, if we don't have a starting point for information, information would never exist. Because information has to be there to start. If we look at evolution, if evolution is true, information needs to be there to start, because information goes into the cells, into the DNA, into all of these things that are evolving. If you don't have information from the start, you won't have anything. So the nature of information is what? Immaterial and mind-dependent. It may exist and function in DNA, but where did that information in the DNA come from? And if you want to say matter, well then where do we find information and matter if information is immaterial? Information is holding together matter. Information is comprising the chemicals in matter. It's bringing them together. So information is kind of the whole outside circle. Everything else is dependent upon it. So on the second bullet point, information is abstract and does not take up space. Remember last week I said if you memorize the encyclopedia, is your brain going to get heavier? No. So it doesn't take up space. Information is not dependent upon the hard sciences. This means ultimately that metaphysics, or the nature of the immaterial reality, is necessary in order for the hard sciences to function. So what science does is it observes what information is doing. So if you have the laws of logic or if you have the laws of nature, there's information behind that. A scientist is observing what information is doing and then writing it down and discovering what it does. It's already there, it's already existing, it's already functioning. What a scientist is doing is just observing and writing down what they see. But then, because of human pride, the scientist stands up and says, I have the answers to all, when it's just deriving information from what it sees. So look at this last bullet point on page 1. Information scientist Dr. Warner Gitt cites, anyone who can give an account of the origin of information holds in their hand the key to interpret the world. If you can tell me where information comes from, you have the key of interpreting the entire universe. Boy, is this an evangelistic tool.
Yeah.
How do we use information to point back to God? Because the impossibility of the contrary, either it created itself, well, how does matter evolve into information? It can't. Information is necessary prior to matter. Therefore, matter can't be all-sufficient in itself. We need a new starting point. So if it didn't create itself, it must have been created. What do we need in order for information to exist? A mind, an infinite mind, an immaterial infinite mind. All of this fitting the category of Yahweh. There's our starting point. So see how we use information to go back. See how much time we got. 4 minutes. Since matter is material on top of page 2, it cannot be the causative factor for the existence of information. Now, it can store information, but it can't create it. It can't cause it. Information is stored in physical material like a zip drive or something like that. But that's not where it's caused. Its cause is in a mind. Information requires intelligence, so we need intelligent, infinite, immaterial being. Every one of these attributes are pointing back to God. This in the next bullet point. The same is true regarding human. Okay, ever notice human language? The same thing. Verbal communication consists of language, and language is information. Syntax includes all structural properties needed to conduct language. Rules are needed to govern the way of grammar, vocabulary, and sentences. Languages are not codes in the sense if you learn one, you can learn them all the same way. Because I'm learning very well that what we say in English doesn't translate word for word into Spanish. In my mind, I'll translate something in English to Spanish. I'll use the correlative words in my mind, and I'll say it to Jeanette. She's like, what? And she'll correct me. You use the wrong verb, you say this. Well, in English, we use a certain verb, but in Spanish, you don't. And I'm sure in Korean or whatever other language, it's the same thing. They're not copy codes. They're different intelligences and different ways of speaking and different grammar and different... with Greek, there's no word order in Greek. Subject, direct object, like how we're used to in English. You can have the subject in the beginning. It's all over. So it's a lot different. So the question is how do we account for human language? You go over to Africa, there's over 2,200 different languages in Africa. How do you account for that? And they'll say, well, cavemen, woo-woo grunting, and then see how, and then all of a sudden they develop a language. Well, how do you account for all? We have lost languages, and we're born with language, and we've never seen historically people without one. So language is information. Where does information come from? So how, as Christians, would we say languages? What would be our answer to the question of where languages come from? What would be our answer? Somebody else give an account for all the languages in the world. What would we say? God, and then specifically Tower of Babel, Genesis 11. It's not just a historic myth. It's not just a myth. It's actual real-time history. And then Acts 17, God created out of one blood all the nations of the world. So God confused the languages at Babel. So we have an answer for it. Now they can reject it. You can't change the human heart and the human will. But what we're showing is Christianity is intelligible in every single area by these 3 steps in the argument. Look at that third from the bottom. No scientist has ever discovered any natural law that can account for the existence of information. Science is silent. It doesn't know where information came from. So the last bullet point, as Dr. Gitt says, it is possible for information to exist without a mental source that has a will with free and deliberate intention. So what is necessary for information to exist? A mental source with a will that has intention. So does matter do that? No. Does natural processes create this? No. So then something had to create it. Aliens. Okay, great. Where did the aliens come from? Right? They're gonna, or we're in a matrix. There's a lot of different theories out there trying to, or we're not here, we just think we are. Those are different things. But ultimately what this shows is you have to be irrational in order to answer that outside of God. That's what we're showing. Christianity is intelligible. All right, I'll pray. We're finished next week. All right, we'll see you. Lord, we just thank you for all of this and how your word can be trusted and how you are the ultimate source of all things. Tracing things back to you is an evangelistic method, and we pray we just develop this and ask this in your Son's name. Amen.